May 23, 1944, 15:30 hours estimated. Carano, Italy, open field. Technical Sergeant Van Thomas Barfoot, 24 years old, kneeling. The M1A1 Bazooka sat on his right shoulder, all 13.26 pounds of it. The M6A1 HEAT rocket was loaded, 3.5 pounds of shaped charged copper waiting to collapse into a molten jet, capable of punching through 119.4 millimeters of steel at 0 degrees obliquity. 75 yards ahead, 3 Panzerkampfwagen VI Tiger Ausf.E tanks advanced directly toward the platoon positions Barfoot had just secured. 54 tons each, frontal hull armor 100 millimeters thick, angled to an effective thickness approaching 140 millimeters. The 88 millimeter KWK 36L56 main gun could engage targets at 1,800 meters. Doctrine said, engage Tigers from 150 yards minimum, from cover, aiming for tracks or flanks. Barfoot was at 75 yards, completely exposed, standing between 3 Mark VI tanks and the men he had led through a minefield 6 hours earlier. The lead Tiger's MG-34 coaxial machine gun began traversing toward him. The turret was still oriented forward toward the American lines, but the commander had spotted the lone figure in the open field. In approximately 4 seconds, 7.92 millimeter rounds would begin impacting the dirt around Barfoot's position at 1,200 rounds per minute. That morning, Barfoot had eliminated 3 German MG-42 machine gun nests, killed 8 Germans, captured 17 prisoners. Crossed terrain the rest of Company L could not cross because reconnaissance patrols over 2 weeks had taught him where the gaps existed in a minefield containing 72,517 telemines and 23,172 S-mines. Now, because the German commanders refused to accept the loss of that defensive position, they had sent armor. If you want to understand how a former civilian Conservation Corps ranger traversed a minefield, destroyed 3 machine gun nests, disabled a 54-ton Tiger tank, and carried 2 wounded men 1,700 yards to safety, all in the same 11-hour period, then what follows is the only account that matters. Because Van Thomas Barfoot did not do the impossible, he did exactly what 3 years of CCC forestry training and 4 months of combat reconnaissance taught him to do. He read terrain better than doctrine. And on May 23, 1944, that was enough to break open the Anzio beachhead and change the course of a battle that had been static for 121 days. Van Thomas Barfoot was born June 15, 1919, in Edinburgh, Mississippi. His maternal grandmother was Choctaw Nation, though his parents never formally enrolled him with the tribe. The distinction mattered legally, but the heritage was documented in family records and confirmed through archival sources at military museums. Barfoot's father farmed cotton. The family worked the land through the 1920s, but when the Depression arrived in the early 1930s, the farm collapsed. By 1936, Barfoot was 17 years old, with no employment prospects and no future that did not involve leaving Mississippi. He joined the Civilian Conservation Corps. The CCC was Roosevelt's federal program to employ young men during the Depression. 3 million men cycled through CCC camps between 1933 and 1942. Barfoot served 3 years, from age 17 to 20, working as a forestry ranger in 2 locations, Lexington, Mississippi, and Salem, Oregon. The work was not romantic, it was technical. CCC Rangers followed standardized curriculum with certified instructors and federal manuals. Barfoot learned silviculture, species identification, fire control techniques. He learned to create fire breaks, manage controlled burns, read topographic maps. He learned to identify depressions, drainage systems, elevation changes. He learned to move through dense forest without leaving trace and to use terrain for advantage rather than fighting against it. None of this was instinctive indigenous knowledge. It was federal training, documented in CCC records, taught the same way engineers learn to build bridges. On March 16, 1940, Barfoot enlisted in the United States Army from Carthage, Mississippi. He was assigned to the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One, and trained in Louisiana and Puerto Rico. When Pearl Harbor was attacked on December 7, 1941, Barfoot had been in uniform for 21 months. He was promoted to sergeant in December 1941. In 1943, he transferred to the 157th Infantry Regiment, 45th Infantry Division, the Thunderbirds. The 45th was unique among American divisions. It had the highest proportion of Native American soldiers of any unit in the United States Army. Over 1,500 Native Americans from more than 50 tribes served in the division, which drew heavily from Oklahoma, Arizona, Colorado, and New Mexico National Guard units. The division's insignia was a Thunderbird, a symbol adopted after the original swastika emblem used in Native American tradition was retired in the 1930s due to Nazi appropriation. Barfoot saw his first combat in July 1943 during the invasion of Sicily. In September 1943, he participated in the Salerno landings. On the night of December 9th and 10th, 1943, Barfoot led a patrol that destroyed 3 German machine gun nests, killed 5 enemy soldiers, and captured 2 prisoners. For this action, he received the Silver Star. The citation noted his ability to infiltrate enemy positions silently and engage at close range without alerting adjacent defensive positions. 4 weeks later, on January 22, 1944, Barfoot landed at Anzio as part of Operation Shingle. The Anzio operation was designed to outflank the German Gustav Line and allow Allied forces to advance rapidly toward Rome. Major General John P. Lucas commanded 6th Corps, which landed with 2 divisions and established a beachhead approximately 25 kilometers in diameter. The problem was Lucas hesitated. Instead of advancing immediately toward the Alban Hills and threatening the German rear, he consolidated the beachhead. German Field Marshal Albert Kesselring reacted decisively. Within 48 hours, 8 German divisions were moving to encircle the Allied beachhead. What was supposed to be a rapid breakthrough became a 121-day siege. The Allies were pinned inside a perimeter roughly the size of a small county, subjected to constant artillery fire and counterattacks. Anzio became a killing ground. Soldiers called it the largest self-sustaining prisoner of war camp in Europe, except the prisoners were shooting back. By May 1944, the Allies finally had numerical superiority. 5th Corps launched Operation Buffalo on May 23rd, a coordinated breakout designed to shatter the German defensive line and advance toward Rome. Carano was a small village approximately 25 to 30 kilometers southeast of Rome, positioned on the northern edge of the Anzio perimeter. The terrain was part of the Pontine Marshes, a reclaimed agricultural zone developed under Mussolini in the 1930s. The land featured open fields interspersed with irrigation ditches, drainage canals, hedgerows, and isolated stone farmhouses. It was not mountainous, but the network of water management systems created natural obstacles that channeled movement, and limited maneuver. The German defensive position at Carano consisted of 3 MG-42 machine gun nests positioned on elevated terrain to provide overlapping fields of fire. The MG-42 was one of the most effective machine guns of World War II. It fired 7.92 by 57 mm Mauser ammunition at 1,200 rounds per minute, compared to 450 to 600 rounds per minute for the American BAR. At 1,200 rounds per minute, the MG-42 produced a sound like an electric saw, a continuous tearing noise that was unmistakable and psychologically devastating. The 3 nests were arranged in a linear defensive line rather than a triangular formation, positioned to cover all approach routes from the direction of the Allied assembly areas. In front of this line was a minefield. Engineering records from the Pontine Marshes sector documented 72,517 Teller anti-tank mines and 23,172 S mines in the general area. Teller mines weighed 10.5 pounds and were pressure-triggered, designed to disable tracked vehicles. S mines, commonly called bouncing Bettys, were anti-personnel devices that used a 2-stage fuse. The initial trigger launched the mine approximately 1 meter into the air, where a secondary charge detonated and sprayed steel fragments in a 360-degree pattern with a lethal radius of 10 to 15 meters. Shoe mines made from wooden boxes were particularly difficult to detect with metal detectors due to the ferrous content of Italian soil, which caused false readings. Doctrine stated that minefields were not crossed without combat engineers using mine detectors and prodding tools. Clearance time for a field of this density was estimated at 2 to 4 hours. Company L did not have 2 hours. Operation Buffalo was happening now. At 0600 hours on May 23, 1944, American artillery began a preparatory bombardment of the German defensive line at Carano. The 105 mm howitzers fired for 15 minutes, the impacts producing the characteristic crump, crump, crump sound of high explosive shells detonating on impact. At 0615 hours, the artillery lifted and Company L advanced. 30 to 40 men in dispersed line formation moved out of the assembly area and across the open ground toward the German positions. They covered 100 meters, then 150 meters. The first MG-42 opened fire. The sound was unmistakable. Brrrt. 1,200 rounds per minute. The sustained fire sounded less like individual shots and more like tearing fabric, a continuous ripping noise. Men dropped flat. A second MG-42 opened fire from the left flank, a third from the right flank. Company L was caught in a crossfire with no cover and no ability to maneuver forward or backward without taking casualties. The company was pinned. The company commander assessed the situation. Frontal assault was suicide. The MG-42 nests had interlocking fields of fire. Flanking was impossible because of the minefield, which extended to both sides of the approach route. Engineers were not immediately available. The assault was stalled. Technical Sergeant Van T. Barfoot stepped forward. He had been conducting reconnaissance patrols in this sector for 2 weeks. The Medal of Honor citation filed after the battle states explicitly, because of the patrols he had made, he knew the terrain and the layout of the minefield. Barfoot told the company commander he could reach the nests by using terrain features that bypassed the densest mine concentrations. The commander hesitated. Crossing a minefield alone, without engineers, was a violation of doctrine. Barfoot repeated that he knew where the gaps were. The commander paused for 5 seconds, then said go. Barfoot picked up his Thompson M1A1 submachine gun. The Thompson weighed 10.8 pounds unloaded and fired 45 ACP ammunition from a 30-round box magazine at 700 rounds per minute. He took 6 Mark II fragmentation grenades. Each grenade weighed 1.3 pounds, contained TNT filler, and had a fuse delay of 4 to 5 seconds with a lethal radius of 10 meters and a casualty radius of 20 meters. He adjusted his M1943 webbing and M1 steel helmet. Total equipment load was approximately 20 pounds. The company commander told him a support squad would follow at a distance to collect prisoners. Barfoot moved out alone. The Medal of Honor citation states that Barfoot moved off alone upon the enemy left flank. This phrasing is precise. Barfoot did not cross the minefield in the conventional sense. He used what his CCC training had taught him to identify: dead ground. The Pontine Marshes irrigation ditches were 1 to 2 meters deep and ran perpendicular to the German defensive line. These ditches collected water and were not suitable locations for mine emplacement. Mines required dry, stable soil to function reliably. Waterlogged ground causes corrosion and reduces pressure fuse sensitivity. Additionally, German doctrine prioritized mining likely armor and infantry approach routes, which were typically flat, open terrain. The irrigation ditches were considered less likely avenues because they required soldiers to move through water and mud, slowing advance and exposing troops to plunging fire if detected. Barfoot entered an irrigation ditch approximately 20 meters south of Company L's axis of advance. He moved through the ditch in a low crouch, water up to his knees, mud sucking at his boots. The ditch ran roughly parallel to the German line for 100 to 150 meters. The MG-42 nests were 50 to 80 meters to his right, still firing at Company L's positions. The noise was deafening. The Germans were focused forward, covering the approach they expected. They were not watching their left flank. Barfoot moved slowly. Every step required checking the ground for tripwires or pressure plates. S-mines were sometimes placed in likely covered approaches, even if those approaches were ditches. He did not use a metal detector because the noise would alert the Germans. He relied on visual inspection and the knowledge from his patrols. He had walked this ground twice before, at night, mapping the irrigation system. After approximately 10 minutes, Barfoot reached a position 20 to 30 yards from the first machine gun nest, approaching from the German left flank. He crawled the final 20 yards. The German crew was 2 men, one on the gun, one feeding ammunition belts. They were focused forward, toward Company L. Barfoot pulled the pin on a Mark II grenade, held it for 1 second to reduce the enemy's reaction time, then threw. The grenade arced through the air. 4 seconds. It landed inside the sandbag emplacement. The explosion killed 2 Germans instantly. 3 others were wounded, shouting. Barfoot did not stop. He continued moving along the German defensive line toward the second nest. The second machine gun nest was approximately 30 yards north of the first, positioned on the same linear axis. The crew had heard the explosion, but did not know where the attack had come from. The noise of battle, combined with intermittent American mortar fire, created confusion. The German gunner and his assistant began traversing the MG-42 toward the area of the first nest, trying to identify the threat. Barfoot emerged from a depression 15 yards from their position. He raised the Thompson M1A1 and fired a controlled burst. 30 rounds at 700 rounds per minute equates to approximately 2.6 seconds of fire. At 15 yards, the 45 ACP cartridge delivers approximately 500 joules of energy per round. The heavy, slow-moving bullet is devastating at close range. 2 Germans died immediately, the gunner and the assistant gunner. The remaining 3 crew members stood with their hands raised, shouting, "Kamerad," the German word for comrade, which was universally understood as a surrender call. Barfoot gestured for them to move back toward the support squad, which was following approximately 50 meters behind. The 3rd machine gun nest was 40 yards farther north. The crew had heard the grenade explosion at the first nest and the Thompson firing at the second nest. They understood the defensive line was collapsing. Before Barfoot reached their position, the entire crew stood and raised their hands. The Medal of Honor citation states, "Members of another enemy machine gun crew then abandoned their position and gave themselves up to Sergeant Barfoot." 3 more prisoners. Barfoot directed them to the support squad and continued moving. Barfoot did not stop at the 3 primary nests. The citation notes he proceeded to mop up positions in the immediate area, capturing more prisoners. These were smaller fighting positions, individual riflemen in foxholes and trenches, soldiers who saw the machine gun line collapse and decided resistance was futile. Over the next 15 minutes, Barfoot collected 8 to 10 additional prisoners. The citation provides the final count, bringing his total count to 17. 17 prisoners captured, 8 Germans killed. The action lasted approximately 60 minutes, from 06:15 hours when Company L was pinned to 07:15 hours when the last prisoners were secured. With the machine gun nests eliminated, Company L advanced through the gap Barfoot had created. The defensive position that had stopped an entire company for over an hour was broken by one man using terrain knowledge and close quarters aggression. By 0800 hours, Company L had secured the objective at Carano. Barfoot returned to the American lines, reloaded his Thompson, and reported to the company commander. The commander told him outstanding work. Barfoot said nothing. He sat down, ate a K ration, drank from his canteen, and checked his equipment. His hands were shaking slightly, residual adrenaline. For the first time since 0600 hours, he had time to process what had happened. He had crossed a minefield and destroyed 3 machine gun nests in an hour. Company L was moving forward. The German defensive line at Carano was broken. And then the German counterattack arrived. At approximately noon, forward observers reported the sound of heavy engines to the northeast. Diesel, tracked vehicles, dust rising in the distance. The Germans were sending armor. Company L was light infantry. They had no heavy anti-tank weapons, no 57mm anti-tank guns, no mines. The only anti-armor capability available was the M1A1 Bazooka. The bazooka was effective against lighter German vehicles like half-tracks, Panzer III tanks, and Stug 3 assault guns. Against heavier armor, it was marginal. The M6A1 HEAT warhead could penetrate 119.4 millimeters of armor at 0 degrees obliquity, but German heavy tanks had significantly thicker armor, especially on the frontal arc. Doctrine stated that bazookas should engage heavy armor from the flank or rear, targeting tracks or engine compartments, and should fire from at least 150 yards to allow time for follow-up shots if the first missed. Barfoot walked over to a soldier carrying a bazooka and took the weapon. The soldier looked at him. Barfoot said, "I'll handle it." The company commander said, "Those are Tigers, Sergeant, not Panzer IVs." Barfoot said, "I know." At approximately 1500 hours, after Barfoot had reorganized his men and consolidated the newly captured German positions, the enemy launched a fierce armoured counterattack. 3 Panzerkampfwagen VI Tiger Ausf.E tanks appeared from the northeast, advancing directly toward the platoon positions Barfoot's men now occupied. The Tiger was one of the most formidable tanks produced during World War II. It weighed 54 tons. The frontal hull armour was 100 millimeters thick, angled at approximately 30 to 40 degrees, which increased the effective thickness to between 120 and 140 millimeters. The main armament was the 88mm KWK-36 L56 gun, capable of engaging and destroying Allied tanks at ranges exceeding 1,800 meters. The secondary armament was a coaxial MG-34 machine gun, firing 7.92mm ammunition at 1,200 rounds per minute. The crew consisted of 5 men: commander, gunner, loader, driver, and radio operator. There has been historical debate about the presence of Tigers at Carano on May 23, 1944. The German 504th Heavy Panzer Battalion did not arrive in Italy until after June 4th, 11 days after Barfoot's action. The 508th Heavy Panzer Battalion had seen limited action at Anzio in February 1944, but had largely withdrawn by May. It is possible the tanks were Panzer IV models with long-barrel 75mm guns, which were frequently misidentified as Tigers by Allied personnel. However, the Medal of Honor citation is official military documentation and explicitly states 3 Mark VI tanks. This analysis treats the citation as authoritative. The 3 Tigers advanced in line formation, the lead tank approximately 50 meters ahead of the other 2, which flanked it at 50-meter intervals. This was standard German armour doctrine for open terrain. The lead tank engaged threats while the flanking tanks provided covering fire and protected against infantry anti-tank teams. The target was the American positions at Carano, specifically the trenches and fighting positions Barfoot's platoon now occupied. Barfoot picked up the M1A1 Bazooka and walked forward. He did not take cover. He walked into the open field between the German armour and the American lines. Soldiers shouted for him to get back, that he was exposed. Barfoot ignored them. He walked to a position 75 yards from the advancing Tigers and knelt. Doctrine said engage Tigers at 150 yards minimum. Barfoot was at 75 yards. The reason was simple: accuracy. The M1A1 Bazooka fired an unguided rocket. At 150 yards, the rocket's trajectory was influenced by wind, the gunner's tremor, and the rocket's inherent instability. Accuracy degraded significantly beyond 100 yards. At 75 yards, the chance of hitting a specific target, such as a tank track, increased dramatically. But 75 yards also meant the Tiger's coaxial MG-34 could engage Barfoot with devastating effect. The trade-off was precision versus survival. The lead Tiger's commander, positioned in the cupola, spotted Barfoot. He shouted to the gunner. The MG-34 began traversing toward the lone figure kneeling in the field. Barfoot aimed at the lead tank's right track. The track and drive sprocket were vulnerable to shaped charge warheads. The track itself was steel, approximately 30 to 50 millimeters thick, significantly thinner than the frontal armor. The M6A1 HEAT warhead functioned by collapsing a copper cone into a superheated jet of molten metal, traveling at approximately 8,000 meters per second. This jet could penetrate steel armor by hydrodynamic force rather than kinetic impact. Hitting the track would not destroy the tank, but it would immobilize it. An immobile tank was a static pillbox, incapable of maneuvering or flanking. Barfoot squeezed the trigger. The M1A1 Bazooka fired with a loud whoosh. The backblast extended 10 meters behind him, a jet of flame and gas. The rocket traveled at 270 feet per second. At 75 yards, flight time was approximately 0.8 seconds. The rocket left a white smoke trail. The M6A1 HEAT warhead struck the lead Tiger's right track at the drive sprocket. The shaped charge detonated. The copper cone collapsed, forming the molten jet. The jet penetrated the drive sprocket and ruptured the track. The track separated and began to spool off the road wheels. The Tiger's right track was disabled. The tank stopped immediately. The engine continued running, a deep diesel rumble, but the tank could not move. The driver attempted to pivot on the left track, but without the right track engaged, the Tiger was immobilized. The Medal of Honor citation states, "From a distance of 75 yards, his first shot destroyed the track of the leading tank, effectively disabling it." The use of the word destroyed is technically imprecise. The track was damaged and rendered non-functional, which effectively disabled the tank's mobility. The tank itself was not destroyed, but it was mission-killed. The Tiger's commander ordered the crew to evacuate. With the tank immobilized and under direct anti-tank fire, remaining inside was a death sentence. The top hatch opened. 5 crew members began climbing out. The commander, gunner, and loader exited first. Barfoot dropped the bazooka and pulled his Thompson M1A1 from his shoulder sling. He aimed at the 3 crew members descending from the disabled Tiger. He fired. 30 rounds. 700 rounds per minute. 3 seconds. At 75 yards, the .45 ACP was still lethal, though accuracy was reduced compared to close range. 3 crew members dropped before reaching the ground. The driver and radio operator, still inside the tank, closed the hatch. They remained inside the immobilized Tiger rather than risk evacuation under fire. The other 2 Tigers altered course, the Medal of Honor citation states, while the other 2 changed direction toward the flank. The 2 remaining Tigers did not press the attack. With the lead tank disabled and no infantry support visible, the German tank commanders made a tactical decision to withdraw and reposition. Isolated armor without infantry support was vulnerable to close assault teams with satchel charges or additional bazookas. The counterattack stalled. Barfoot did not remain at the disabled Tiger. The citation continues. He continued onward into enemy terrain and destroyed a recently abandoned German field piece with a demolition charge placed in the breach. Barfoot advanced beyond the disabled Tiger into the German rear area. He discovered an abandoned German anti-tank gun, likely a 7.5 centimeter PaK 40 or similar towed artillery piece. The crew had evacuated during the chaos of the armored counterattack. The gun was intact and functional. If the Germans retook the position, they would reclaim the weapon. Barfoot placed a demolition charge, likely a block of TNT or composition explosive, inside the breech mechanism. He detonated the charge. The breech was destroyed, rendering the gun permanently inoperable. As Barfoot returned toward American lines, he encountered 2 wounded soldiers from Company L. They had been hit during the German tank fire, likely from high explosive shells fired by the Tigers before the counterattack stalled. The 2 men were approximately 200 yards forward of the American fighting positions in open ground, unable to move under their own power. The citation states, "Despite artillery and mortar shells which fell on him as he worked, he assisted 2 of his seriously wounded men 1,700 yards to a position of safety." The distance of 1,700 yards is approximately 1.5 kilometers or 1,554 meters. Barfoot carried and assisted the two wounded men across this distance while German artillery and mortar fire continued to impact the area. The method is not documented, but standard practice for a single rescuer with 2 casualties involves repeated trips. Carry the first man to a covered position, return for the second man, then assist both men together using a shoulder support technique, where each wounded man drapes an arm over Barfoot's shoulders and he half carries, half drags them. The evacuation took approximately 45 to 60 minutes. German mortar rounds impacted within 50 to 100 meters intermittently. At 1700 hours, Barfoot reached the American lines with both wounded men. Medics took custody and evacuated them to the aid station. Barfoot collapsed against the wall of a trench. He had been in continuous action since 0615 hours. It was now 1700 hours. 11 hours. His uniform was soaked with sweat, mud, and blood that was not his. His canteen had been empty for hours. His hands shook, not from fear, but from exhaustion and residual adrenaline. The count for May 23, 1944, was precise. Morning action. 3 machine gun nests eliminated, 8 Germans killed, 17 prisoners captured, 1 minefield traversed. Afternoon action. 1 Tiger tank immobilized at 75 yards, 3 crew killed. 2 Tigers repelled, 1 anti-tank gun destroyed. Casualty evacuation. 2 men carried 1,700 yards under fire. Total combat time, 11 hours. The company commander approached Barfoot at approximately 1800 hours. He said, "I'm recommending you for the Medal of Honor." Barfoot, too exhausted to respond, nodded. The commander said, "You did the impossible, twice in one day." The immediate tactical consequence of Barfoot's actions was that Company L secured its objective at Carano and held it against German counterattack. The elimination of the 3 machine gun nests allowed the company to advance, and the disabling of the lead Tiger stopped the armoured counterattack. The broader strategic impact was that Barfoot's action contributed to Operation Buffalo, the breakout from the Anzio beachhead. On June 4, 1944, 12 days after the action at Carano, Allied forces entered Rome. The 45th Infantry Division exploited the breakthrough and advanced as part of the drive toward the Italian capital. The Medal of Honor recommendation was filed on May 24, 1944, 1 day after the action. The citation was processed through Division, Corps, and Theatre Command. General Order No. 79, approving the Medal of Honor, was issued on October 4, 1944. The formal presentation ceremony was held on September 28, 1944, in Épinal, France. Lieutenant General Alexander Patch, commanding the United States 7th Army, presented the medal. The ceremony was held in the field, not in an office, because Barfoot requested that his soldiers be allowed to attend. Hundreds of men from the 45th Infantry Division were present. There is a discrepancy in the Medal of Honor citation regarding Barfoot's rank. The citation header lists him as second lieutenant, but the narrative repeatedly refers to him as Tech, Sergeant, and Sergeant. The explanation is that Barfoot received a battlefield commission to second lieutenant sometime between May 23 and September 28, 1944. Battlefield commissions for Medal of Honor recipients were frequently expedited. By the time of the presentation ceremony, Barfoot held the rank of second lieutenant, which is why the citation header reflects the officer rank. Barfoot did not return home after receiving the Medal of Honor. He continued fighting in Europe until VE Day on May 8, 1945. After World War II, he remained in the army. He served in the Korean War from 1950 to 1953, where he was promoted to major. In 1960, at age 40, Barfoot completed flight training and became a pilot, an unusual achievement for an infantry officer at that age. During the Vietnam War from 1967 to 1968, Barfoot served as Deputy Aviation Officer and was awarded 11 air medals for combat missions. He was 47 to 48 years old during his Vietnam service, extraordinarily old for a combat zone assignment. Barfoot retired from the Army in 1974 as a colonel after 34 years of service. His awards included the Medal of Honor, Silver Star, Purple Heart with 2 oak leaf clusters indicating 3 total wounds, Bronze Star, 3 Legions of Merit, 11 Air Medals, and the Mississippi Medal of Honor. After retirement, he served as Senior Army Advisor to the Virginia Army National Guard. Van Thomas Barfoot died on March 2, 2012, at age 92. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. Fort Barfoot, a Virginia Army National Guard installation, was named in his honor. Multiple military museums, including the National World War II Museum and the Army Heritage Museum, feature exhibits dedicated to his service. The 45th Infantry Division Museum in Oklahoma includes a section on Barfoot's actions at Carano. The Choctaw Nation recognizes Barfoot as a hero of Native American heritage, despite his not being officially enrolled in the tribe. Somewhere near Carano, Italy, there are fields that were once part of Mussolini's reclaimed Pontine Marshes. In the 1930s, engineers drained the swamps and built irrigation systems. In May 1944, German engineers filled those fields with 72,517 telemines and 23,172 S-mines. Doctrine said, nobody crosses a minefield without engineers. Van Thomas Barfoot, age 24, former forestry ranger, said, "I know the terrain." He knew because he had walked it at night on reconnaissance patrols. He knew because 3 years in the Civilian Conservation Corps taught him to read topographic maps and identify drainage systems. He crossed the minefield by not crossing it. He used the ditches the mines could not occupy. By morning, he had eliminated 3 machine gun nests, killed 8 Germans, and captured 17 prisoners. By afternoon, he had disabled a 54-ton Tiger tank at 75 yards and killed 3 crew members. By evening, he had carried 2 wounded men 1,700 yards to safety. 11 hours of continuous combat. Fewer than 1% of Medal of Honor citations document 2 distinct actions on the same day. Barfoot is in that 1%. The doctrine said, seek cover, avoid exposure, wait for engineers. Barfoot said, I know the terrain. He was right, and it changed the war.